Hello.
Hi, everyone. Hello.
Welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I am Brandon Testers. I'm a licensed therapist, but this is not therapy for very, very many reasons. Today with me is Margaret. You want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Margaret. I'm a licensed professional counselor. Been here since last July, and this is my first stream, so a little nervous, but excited to be here. I'll be honest with you.
And by here, she's referring to Effective Artistry, which is the small group practice that we are both a part of. We do individual, couples, family, and group therapy. We also do executive functioning coaching with executive functioning coaches. So you guys get two licensed therapists who are not going to do therapy today.
Yeah.
This is Not Therapy Hour. It's just an open conversation. If you're here, we appreciate you being here. For those of you who are here in the chat, the things that you type in the chat, we will see. And it's like any conversation, we respond to what we see. Questions, conversation, jokes. I laugh at the chat a lot, actually.
I've watched them. I've seen it.
I feel like that's always strange when I'm talking to somebody else, because then I'll laugh at the chat and they don't realize I'm looking at the chat and they think I laughed at what they just said. And they're like, we pick a topic so that we have something to start talking about. So it's not just quiet while we wait for somebody in the chat to say anything. Today's topic is back to school, which, my 6-year-old just went back to first day of first grade today. Mm-hmm. So it's that time of year. And we this time got some questions in advance.
Yeah.
So that we have some questions to start with so that we can talk about, people's actual concerns rather than me just trying to guess what people might find interesting and relevant. But even though that's the topic, those of you who are here in the chat, you are in charge, right? The first priority are the people who are here asking things. So we can go wherever. We often will get off topic. I will often get off topic.
I'll try to bring them back.
I think that's pretty much all that's relevant to say. Okay. So let's start with some questions.
All right. So something that this is also my personal question for myself. So something that I've noticed too is working with a lot of adolescent clients is they're involved in a lot of extracurricular activities. So, it's not like they just get home at 4, they're home at 9 o'clock. And so that's the time, they do their homework, they get ready for the day, but they're still feeling bad for procrastinating. And so I guess my thought is, with talking to my clients, I guess I would say that they don't want to stop their activities. Like a lot of them feel like this is helping them and it's helping them with, their social anxiety, with doing other things with other people. But it's almost like I feel stuck sometimes because they don't want to procrastinate yet they're home at 9:30. So it's like they don't really have a choice. So it's kind of about like, I've asked, are these all the things that you want to do? And they don't want to cut anything out. So it's hard for me to kind of figure out how to not procrastinate when they're home at 9 o'clock. It's almost like they don't really have a choice.
Yeah, well,
in a way.
That's a good question. And yes, I have a lot of clients ask me that too. And parents ask me that. People just generally ask me that. And there's a lot to unpack there. The biggest one and the one what I would start with is, what do we mean procrastinate? Doing it the soonest you can do it. If you get home at 9:30 and that's the soonest you can do it, that's not procrastinating, right?
Right.
So I'll say this briefly because I don't think it's worth spending a ton of time getting into the details on this, but this is a structural, systemic problem. We're asking them to do things that are not doable, right? We want them to go to school and be focused and energized all day, then go to these extracurricular activities that are also important, and you got to focus there. Like, what coach of any team at practice after school is saying, like, take it easy because you've had a long day and you still have homework.
Right.
Each person in front of them is asking for output all the time. And then they get home and then they got to do homework, but we also want them to go to bed early, but it's not doable.
Yeah.
So we don't need to get into all the details of that, but you want to acknowledge that to start with, because for exactly the reason we'll talk about next, that procrastination thing. There's something I like to reference a lot. It's called the just world fallacy. The idea that the world is just, meaning outside of myself and outside of anything where I specifically know that it isn't just, that it isn't correct. Everything else is just assumed to be done as it should be. So one of the things that means in this case is if a teacher gives a homework assignment to a class, the student will assume that that is a homework assignment that they should be prepared to do, right? That theoretically the teacher has taught us the things that we need to know in order to do it. Theoretically, the teacher has thought about how long it will take and has given us enough time before it's due, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So when they start to struggle with that, they turn it into an individual problem. And you'll hear people say this, like, I don't know what am I missing that everybody else knows or whatever. But talking about it as procrastination is a big red flag for that. Really, any language that's like self-critical, that makes it seem as though the biggest part of the problem is what I am thinking or what I'm choosing to do.
Right.
So we have to address that part first, not so that they just get mad at the system, although get mad at the system, it's a crappy system.
Yeah.
But because if you're attempting to implement a strategy that is designed for a situation in which everything you have been assigned is completable and doable within the time frame, and you still get to bed early and you still socialize because that's important and blah, blah, blah. If you're designing strategies around that idea and then trying to use it in the case where it's not true, right? It isn't possible to do all those things. Those strategies not only won't work, they'll make things worse.
Right. Well, I think another thing too is, I guess maybe I phrased it wrong, because I feel like for a lot of my clients that have been doing that, like, they don't see a problem with the procrastination themselves. They're still able to do it, turn it in, they feel fine. I think it's just like that construct of procrastination, like, you shouldn't be doing this. So even when they are turning in assignments and they're doing it late, they don't have a problem with it. A lot of times they even focus better at night. Like, I know for me, like, I focus better at 9 or 10 p.m. where I can do the best work. But I think I struggle too with feeling like, this is procrastination, this isn't good. But then it's almost like a double-edged sword. Like, this is more helpful for me because I've tried doing things in the morning and my brain's not ready too early. So I think that's the hard part, is like, they're still in that, it's wrong. I shouldn't be doing this, even though it's helping them.
Right. So that's why we need to address it, because in some cases, at least, like what you're talking about, right? The best thing we can do is to remove the shame and the stigma around doing it the way that they're doing it that works. So if doing it at 10 p.m. works for me, and that's what I end up doing, even if it's not like extracurriculars, right? If I come home and I intend to do my homework right after work or right after school, but I don't, blah, 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 and I get stressed, and then finally 10 o'clock I do it. And then people will say, oh, it's the stress that motivates me, which it's not. It's never. Stress doesn't motivate you. Well, that's a bigger conversation. Really, we need to be clear about what it is that's happening. So one thing that I would say whenever anybody's talking about procrastination, I want to define what that is. To me, I think the most useful way to define procrastination is, I believe that it would be better to do this thing now than later. And I believe that I have everything I need to be able to do this thing now, and I'm not doing it now. Usually that second step is where the problem lies, is that they think they have everything that they need, but they don't really. So we would focus in there. But that's procrastination. Whereas doing something at the last minute just means I'm starting it at the last point at which, if I don't start it, I won't be able to complete it by the time I need to complete it.
Right.
So those are two different things. But especially kids will often talk about doing things at the last minute as procrastination. Right. And it's not. It can be. They can overlap, but they're not the same. So we need strategies designed for what is happening, which is that they're overloaded. Yeah. And really, a lot of this would be more effectively done. And we do, professional development and things like that, working with teachers and schools to try and accommodate this kind of stuff. But leaving that aside for now, just the individual, you got to make some choices. Yeah. If you can't get everything done that you need to be doing, something's going to go undone. There's this magical thinking that if I just learn a new skill or find a new trick or whatever, I'll be able to do it all, which it sticks for people because it's true, right? Like, if I do get faster at something or learn a new way or design a new system or use a new app or whatever, it can make it so that I get things done in a quicker time. But if somebody's overbooked like that, what that means is that they don't stop taking on new things until they're overbooked. Right. So if I am able to squish all that stuff down so I can get it all done, well, that just means now I've got something, I can take on a new thing.
I think the hardest thing is just the picking and choosing of what thing to let go of, because it all comes with their own things. So that's the hard part is, seeing like the cost and the value of which things are the easiest to let go of. But I feel like it almost ends up being a dead end because they're mostly thinking of like, I'm going to be missing out on that social aspect.
Yeah.
If they were to not be in a certain group or a certain club.
I love that. Even that language, missing out on that social aspect, is I've got to justify spending my time and energy doing this. I can't just say I like it and I'm with people that I like doing things that I like. I have to phrase it as it's a worthwhile way to spend my time and energy because it's a social element that if I don't get it will be problematic, which a lot of the time is because people who are in this situation are in families and communities where the default assumption is you'll overbook yourself.
Right.
And to stop, you have to be able to justify it. You have to say, okay, I need to stop taking on more so that I have some time to socialize with my friends instead of just this is too much and I want free time and whatever it is. Right. So they're learning that language. That's part of where like neurodiversity and diagnosis comes in a lot too, is because people will say, because I have ADHD, I can't X, Y, or Z, as though it needs to be justified. Nobody should be forcing you to do these things. Anyway, so back to for an individual who's in that position, how do you choose? It's tough. What I would say is if you don't want to give up any of the things that you're doing, the activities, then look at whether you can give up any of your ideas about how those things should be done. Okay. Meaning, first thing, let go of the idea of doing it the right way and see if you can figure out a way to just do it, even though it's procrastinating or I'm kind of half-assing it or whatever. If you can get it all done, then you don't have to give any of it up. You're just giving up the idea of I could do this in 2 hours at the last minute, but I should take 5 hours on it and start earlier.
Right.
Generally, I commonly with like high school age clients, some of that stuff that is easiest to give up is things like studying, because most of the studying that people do is not helpful at all. They're just doing it because they think that they should do it. So either stop or figure out how studying actually works. Because almost always if you ask people, what do you need to do so that you can perform better on the test like you want to do? They'll say, I just need to study more. Right. And you say, what do you mean? Study. I got to study. Like if I walked in to a room in which you're studying, what would I see? And then they'll say, looking over my notes or rereading the textbook, both of which are incredibly inefficient and unhelpful things to do. It's just a time sink.
This brings me back to, this is another question I wanted to ask is, what would you think is I know I think I'm going to answer this as I ask it, but I think it does vary person to person, but like, what is like the best way to study?
Well, it does vary person to person, and it varies from one class to the next. So you're right, we can't give like specifics, but we can talk about a process. I like to use the language when I'm talking with people about this of like recon or scouting or research, something like that. The first step in a studying process should be gathering as much information as you can get about what it is you're preparing for. Okay. In like every other element, every other aspect of life, that's what we would do. Right. You wouldn't say like, oh, you need a job, you should prepare for that. Yeah. Like you'd say, well, let's see what's out there. Let's get what are you looking for? What do people pay for? What is the way that you usually would go about, So the first element of studying is learning as much as you can about the test. So maybe just to keep this fun for myself, it's fun anyway, but let's break some myths about school, because a lot of that gets involved in these questions both so far. Okay. So here's a myth about school, is that tests assess how much you've learned. The tests assess your mastery of a skill or of a subject area. They don't. Right. They can't. That's what they're trying to do. It's impossible to do that in any kind of way that we could use as an assessment, because the point of an assessment is that it is standardized. Right. That all of you are doing it so that we can rank performance one against the other. Are you talking specifically like standardized tests? No, I'm talking in general. All tests, all assessments. Because, and that's anything you could study for. Okay, I like that you brought that up, because I guess the majority of my clients would say flashcards help, and even with me, I could do flashcards for 2 days, ace the test, and then the next day I don't remember anything I did. Well, it depends on the test, right? So flashcards are generally pretty good for anything where you want rote memorization. Right. And in particular, what you're doing is encoding information. So if I say problem at this point, because you and I have done this work and we share language, you and I both will understand that to mean I'm aware of a thing that is different than I want it to be, even though that's not what problem means to
Right.
everybody all the time, right? So flashcards are a way of encoding that you put problem on the front and you put the bigger definition on the back. What you're doing is training yourself to see the word, the phrase, the prompt, the trigger, whatever, and then automatically connect it to the larger information, the
Right.
greater, more granular, detailed information on the back. So that's really great when you're going to have to do things like vocabulary, or if it's going to be things like sometimes on history tests, for example, they'll give you a date and you have to match it to the thing that happened on
Right.
that date. So flashcards are really great for rote memorization, connecting two things so that when you see one, you retrieve the other. But a lot of tests, like if you're going to have to do an essay, a timed essay,
Right.
flashcards are not going to be very helpful for you.
Right.
So that's the problem with how it's mostly taught. We teach studying as here's a set of activities, go over your notes, do flashcards, do practice tests, whatever. And then people apply those activities or do those activities thinking, surely this will help me. And then it doesn't. And again, just world fallacy. Well, why would everybody say to study that way if it didn't help you?
Right.
It does. It just doesn't help me. So what's wrong with me?
Right.
Again, which is fine, as long as they don't internalize it.
Yeah.
And then, you make changes. Fine, that doesn't work for me. Let me find something else.
Well, I think the thing with the offloading, what you're talking about, how like when talking about them and all these other activities and clubs, is the note cards, for example, it's easy for them to remember that, but then they get upset because they don't remember it in the long term, but they don't have time to memorize it in the long term because they're filled, their schedule is so filled.
Yeah.
So it's like, how are we finding that balance if they want to do all of that?
Well, and that's the thing. It's when you're asked to do more than you can do within the time frame or whatever the constraints are, right? Like if I had infinite time and energy and whatever, sure, I can do it all. But I'm being asked to do some things that will take me 2 days worth of energy to do, but I got to get it all done today.
Right.
There are things that you can do there when we're talking about energy specifically, which, by the way, is almost always the culprit when someone is procrastinating. When they're saying, I have everything I need, I have the time, it's important to do it now, and I'm not. Almost always what that means is they don't have the energy that they need to be able to do it. They just don't think of energy as a resource. They think of it as willpower.
Right.
Like I can just flip some switches and now I'll have the energy. Which, if you could do that, why would you sleep? Why does anybody sleep?
Right.
If you can just give yourself it's an actual like thing, calories and rest, and there are toxins in your body that need to be cleared out. Right. Anyway, they'll say that I don't have time to memorize it.
Yeah.
Right? Some things got to give at the end of the day. And that's why I want to start with giving up doing it right before giving up any of the individual things. I don't want to write off, okay, I just won't do that test then, or I just will quit that club, because those things, they serve a purpose for you. Right. Even if it's not what everybody's saying that it is, it's still important to do the homework because it affects your grade or whatever.
Right.
Not to mention other people's perception of you and your perception of yourself and blah, blah, blah. So getting help, and please just generally, if you are trying to help somebody who is overloaded, they have more on their plate than they can handle. The first thing you need to do to help that person is take something off their plate. Do not I see parents and teens especially get locked into this pattern, this spiral where, okay, I get it, they're overwhelmed, they're overloaded, but we both are approaching it with the idea that the reason they can't keep up isn't because they're being asked to do too much, it's because they're doing it wrong. So then I'm going to teach them, oh, if you just did it this way, or try this, use this kind of an alarm or this kind of a system or whatever, more often than not, by a long shot, that's going to make it worse. Because when you are tapped out, you're tapped out. And doing something that's new, doing something differently than you've done it before, that's doing something new, it takes resources.
Right.
The whole problem is you don't have it. It makes the problem worse because then they think, well, now I've even been given good advice and I can't make myself do that. And then the person who gave the good advice is like, I just told you how to do it. Why aren't you doing it? Why do I need to be involved in this again?
Yeah.
Right? So first you help them free up some resources, take some stuff off their plate, either by doing it for them or finding somebody else who can help do it for them or some element of it for them, right? You write the draft, I'll go over it and look for spelling and punctuation and whatever, so that you can I can take pieces of it out. The other way you can do that is not just by doing it for them, but by helping shift things so that it doesn't matter. If they have household chores that they need to be doing and they're getting overwhelmed, and you can drop those household chores from them, drop them.
Right.
If you can find some other way to handle, they got to pick their sister up from whatever thing. If you can find a ride share or some other thing, find that. Free up their resources. Then you can try new things.
Right.
Once you have the space cognitively, the time and the energy to explore and consider and implement new strategies that would have always worked theoretically, right? Even when they were overloaded. But if you give it that way, it goes badly. If you free up resources and then give it, and then it works. Great.
And I think with that though, because even when they are freeing up their time and they are feeling better, then it comes with their feeling that they're letting everyone down. And then they feel like I'd rather just feel stressed doing all of these activities than not doing it, and then have that extra stress and anxiety about letting people down or letting myself down.
This is why I started with what I started with, is we've got to externalize it a little bit, which isn't to say that you say to somebody, this has nothing to do with you, that you're not doing anything wrong, blah, 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 although they're not doing anything wrong. But it is because sometimes, like, even as I was saying that, people might have been thinking like, well, okay, except sometimes there are things that everybody else is doing just fine and I'm not.
Right.
So yes, there are individual differences. There are things about a person that would make it so that they can write a paper in 30 minutes and a different person takes 4 hours to write that same paper, right? So those exist. If there was nothing there, nobody would talk about this anymore. Right. The reason we get stuck on it is because, like we were saying about finding new ways to fit things in and get things done, it does work a lot of the time. It's when it doesn't work, but I stick with that strategy because I know it can work, it should work, whatever, in lieu of finding something else to try, that it becomes a problem. So we want to establish it's not about them as an individual. It's also not about what's happening and has nothing to do with them at all. It's the interaction between them as an individual and the environment, the context, the things that they're being told or asked, how they're being supported. It's both. And you can do... that makes me sad. Hi, Rex. Hi, Rue.
That's so cute.
Yeah, he gets very insistent when he sees somebody that he wants to hold. And there's a comment, if people aren't seeing it, from my wife who was watching, saying she has to stop because our 10-month-old is seeing me and wants me to hold him, and he's upset that I'm not. He will screech if I come home and he wants me to pick him up, and I'm like, let me wash my hands first. He will. How old are they again? Rex is 10 months. 10 months, right. Miles is 6 years, who just started. And now he's crying. Sorry, but I gotta rush home as soon as I can. Miles is 6, who just started first grade, and then Augie is 3, who's starting preschool tomorrow. Okay. Yeah, we want to look at both parts of it. So, like we talk about the accomplishment equation, right? Cost and value on opposite sides of an equation. And we tend to focus on the cost, which isn't because value doesn't matter. We focus on the cost here because people have already done a lot with the value before they come here. So it's not to say that side, one side matters more. They're equal. Changing things that you're doing as an individual can be helpful. Changing things in the environment and the context and what you're being asked to do can be helpful too. And different things are solved different ways.
I want to switch gears for a second. Yeah. So one other question that someone in my family wants to get answered. She said it was okay if I said that. So it's my sister. Hi. I don't know if you're on here, but my sister was going to be watching, but she wanted me to ask this question. I guess both my sisters. So I'm an aunt of 6. A lot of kids in my family, and they're starting to realize that all of a sudden, like, they haven't really changed anything. They're not in any clubs or anything. For them, it's just school, homework, go home, do their thing. But they're getting a lot of social anxiety. Like, they're like crying a lot. They don't want to go to school. One of my nieces is 8, and she's now kind of acting as if she's like almost 2 or 3, like crying and begging for my sister. And she's just not. I want to ask it. Why do you think that is? like why the social anxiety is increasing?
Could be so many different reasons, including things that are specific to your sister and her family or those kids that I could never know. But we can talk about some things that might theoretically contribute to some social anxiety. That, like we were just saying, that everything that you do is the result of an interaction between you as an individual and the context in which you find yourself. Well, that means we're shaped by our experiences, right? Even on a biological level, it's called epigenetics, that your genetic code is activated by different things in the environment and actually shifts, and that your experiences can be encoded into DNA and passed on and blah, blah, blah. So if they've been in the home more than they usually would have been, right? Like a lot of people were over the last couple of years, and now they're trying to get back to quote unquote normal, which, by the way, if you are a parent of young children and you're trying to get back to normal, please consider that what you're saying is back to normal is actually destroying their normal. My 3-year-old behaving the way that we behaved before the pandemic started is not going back to normal for him. It's changing his entire life.
Right.
They have a smaller subset of experiences. So each of those experiences has a larger weight. So it could be things like that, right? Could be things like what's happening at the school, aside from the fact that there's political stuff getting involved in children's schooling quite a bit more than there used to be, including very visible in terms of some people wear masks and some don't.
Right.
Like there's conflict coming in that way. They're also getting a lot of messaging, potentially, especially the older they get, about how they've been. When we are talking as adults, when we are talking in the media and in the culture about, oh, these kids are getting left behind, or they're lagging, or they're whatever. Again, I think people don't tend to think of kids as people. We just assume that they're either not seeing or hearing that stuff, or if they do, they don't understand it or whatever. No, we're telling them that they're deficient. We're saying, as compared to other kids who are not your age now, but when they were, things were different. You are doing worse than they were. Well, how does that affect things, right? How does it affect things that tons of people have died? Way more than normal, right? Lots and lots of stuff, including even we don't know what COVID does to people's brains. We know that there's damage and long-term stuff, but it could be lingering effects. If anybody's had COVID, it could be that there are things that are lingering. Ultimately, I don't really care about the why, because there's infinite things, including things that are specific to an individual that none of us could know. What I care about is what do we do about it, right? So the question then would be, what is the problem? The social anxiety is not the problem in and of itself. That is a problematic experience. We don't like that experience, but the parents wouldn't know about it unless it was manifesting in some way. That was problematic. So what is the problem that's happening? And then we can talk about what to do about it.
Don't have an answer for that right now. I'll have to get back to you.
If it's about getting them out the door to school without it being an emotionally draining process or whatever, then we can look at things there. If it's about, that when they're at school, they'll become distressed, then we do a different set of things, right? If it's that they're just so drained by the end of the day when they get home that they need that like safety and kind of decompress and whatever, but school, they're not that way and they have to put on the mask, and then that's a different thing too.
Right. And I think I like that you brought up the mask thing, because even from my own family and just having a lot of kids in my family, them not really feeling safe about it being optional, but them not really having a choice because they have to go to school. And I feel like sometimes they, at least in my experience, they feel like they can't come to their parents or their teachers to talk about it too much.
Yeah, well, they can't go to their teachers to talk about it. Teachers in most places have very strict rules about what they're allowed to discuss and what they're allowed to say regarding masking, because if they say that they prefer one version over the other, they can get in trouble from parents and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, as a parent, super important that you're addressing this stuff with them. And my default answer, because again, without specific information, who knows, but my default answer is always tell them the truth to the best of your ability. They're not idiots. They're not unformed people. They're not pre-people. They're just people, and they don't know as much because they haven't been around as long to learn as much.
Right.
But within a specific domain, a kid knows a lot more than me, right? Like when we treat them as though they're deficient, they don't understand things, it generally doesn't go well.
Right.
And that can create that disparity where it's like, okay, I can see, we just spent 2 years talking about, or a year or whatever, talking about why we couldn't be in school and it had to be remote, about why we had to wear masks, and you guys keep changing this on us.
Mm-hmm.
But if nobody's talking to them about that, it just seems random.
Right.
You guys said it was so dangerous we had to wear masks. Now you're saying we don't need to wear masks. Did something change?
Yeah.
And yes, things changed, not necessarily to make it safer, but to make it so that there was less of a willingness, ability to require safety protocols.
Yeah.
It's, how would you feel, any adult feel, if you go in, say you're going to a nuclear reactor, you're like visiting a nuclear power plant, they're like, okay, put on all this gear and whatever, you're like, cool, no questions, got it, it's dangerous, I'm going to do it. And you go and visit that place once a month for a year, and every time they do that, and then you go for your next visit and they're like, come on in, you're like, wait, shouldn't I, am I not supposed to wear why? And if everyone's like, oh, don't worry about it, don't talk to anybody else about it either. Some people will be wearing it, some people won't, but it's better just not to, respect everybody's choice.
Right.
I'm going to be confused and terrified.
Yeah.
They're just people. Answer honestly to the best of your ability, which includes saying, I don't know, when you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, but maybe we can find that out if we blank, blank, blank. Or sometimes just, I don't know. I don't even know if anybody knows. I don't know if we could figure that out or not.
Right.
It's just a thing we got to deal with. This is why I don't care about the why so much. I don't care. Are they struggling because they're procrastinating, because they're overloaded?
Mm-hmm.
We care only enough to be able to determine what we want to try next, what's worth trying. So we think about why. We're not going to be confident of anybody who says they know why any human being thinks, feels, or does what they're doing. They do not.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very useful shorthand way of saying, like, I'm pretty confident that if I do this, it will change this thing. Is to say, I know if I do this, it will go this way. We don't actually know. And people kind of forget that, especially when talking to kids.
Yeah.
Like something I see all the time is when people are talking to their kids, they'll be sarcastic, right? Or some make a joke, or they'll say something that's different than what they actually mean, and forget that the kids might not have the context in that situation to understand why what you're saying doesn't match your nonverbal communication. If I say, like, oh, I really love it when you hit me in the face, they're like, I don't think
right. What do you mean by that?
But you're saying you do, right? We just lose track because we forget. Like, there's a song I like, a rapper talking about his high school days, and one of the lines he says, he talks about this crush he had on this girl for so long, and finally he worked up his nerve to write her a note and slip it into her locker. And after he put it in, he realized it was the wrong locker.
Oh boy.
And the next line in the song is, I thought I would die because of that. And I love that because it's not hyperbolic. If you think back to being in high school and middle school, there are things that you did, whether you would call them a mistake, or experiences that you had that you felt like you might die.
Yeah.
And they say, no, I can't get an A-. And we as adults are like, okay, it's an A-. Like, let's relax a little bit. Is it really worth taking meth to do homework so that you get an A instead of an A-, right? Which is not a coded reference to ADHD medication. I was using actual meth as the example. ADHD medication can be great. For us, well, I got an A- and nobody gives a crap. It has no effect on my life. But that's not the life that they're living. So we have to be honest with them, and we have to listen to them and trust what they say, even if it sounds wrong.
Right. That
when they break up with their significant other and they tell us that they'll never love again and they might as well die, if our response is, oh, it's just puppy love, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
How dismissive and invalidating, whatever. Doesn't mean we want to agree and say, yeah, I think you might as well die.
Yeah, right.
But we want to validate, like, yeah, I understand. I know how badly it can feel when something like that happens. I want to know more about what's happening with you specifically so I can feel like I have an understanding of what's going on with you.
Mm-hmm.
But I understand how it can feel like that. I've been through things like that.
Right.
And I can disagree after, like the nice thing is that you don't die and you meet somebody else. And 10 years from now, you won't care, probably. But that doesn't negate it.
I want to ask, why do you think that they feel like such strong emotions by saying that?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Like when they say, oh, I'm going to die, or I can't leave that happen, and it really upsets them so much. Why do you think that they take it to a higher level at that time?
Well, I think we want to flip the way as opposed to thinking that they mean what they're saying, that they think they're going to die, and why would they think they're going to die?
Mm-hmm.
Let's start with the assumption that they're just using language to try to express something that they don't know how else to express it.
Right.
That they don't legitimately think they're going to die, which might be true, and we want to explore and clarify. But that's why you ask.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by that? Do you mean like you're actually afraid you might die right now, or you mean you just feel worse than you've ever felt and you don't know what's going to happen next because you've never experienced something this bad?
Right. You have a hear that all the time. I want to hear adults in that time with the kids, and it's clear they're really uninterested.
Yeah, this is so more on like the parenting side of things than on the being a kid, or for practitioners and educators who work with kids. I like to think of being able to share things from one human to another through communication is like our evolutionary advantage. It's the thing that made us the dominant species on this planet, right? We're not faster or stronger than everybody else, but we're better at communicating. The reason for that, I like to simplify it down to, if you have to learn everything through your own experience, you can't learn from my experience, then we can't build knowledge collectively and grow it over time because you start from zero. So
Right.
you spend your life relearning all the same stuff that I already learned. Plus, some of those things, especially dangerous things, the only way you're going to learn it if you only learn from your own experience is by being harmed, injured, killed. And so there's not much to learn there.
Right.
So we don't want children to have to learn that playing by the cliff is dangerous because they played by the cliff and somebody fell off and died. We want to be able to tell them, don't play by the cliff, it's dangerous.
Right.
But there's two different ways to do that. One is about sharing your reasoning, to say, hey, don't play over by the cliff because that cliff is a very sharp drop off. And if you fall off, you're going to fall 50 feet. And if you fall 50 feet, you will at least break some bones, maybe die.
Yeah.
Right? And then if they understand it, they can not only follow what you're saying, don't play by the cliff, but they can apply that information in other areas. Anything that's, now I know if I fall 50 feet that could kill me, well, I can generalize that to other things. The other way that we can communicate is, don't go play by that cliff or I'm going to be mad at you. So now I'm not giving you reasoning about why I don't want you to do it, but I am giving you reasoning about it would be beneficial for you not to do it because if you do, there's a social consequence.
Right.
The advantage of the first, like we said, is all that stuff. The advantage of the second is it's cheaper, it's faster, it's quicker, and adults are also overloaded. So we don't have time to sit down and explain every single thing. The related problem that we don't need to get into is that in many cases, adults don't know the answer because nobody told them the answer. They just learned that people would be mad at them if they played by the cliff, and they never thought more deeply about that. And it goes back generations, and people have no idea why they're doing it. But we can leave that aside for now. So when you can, it's better to sit and talk through the reasoning, to reach a agreed upon, yes, it is not worth doing this thing, or it is worth doing this thing because here are the potential consequences. When you can't do that, you just say, do it because I'm the boss, right? Do it or I'll be mad. Do it, whatever. Yelling at someone to do it is a version of that. It's an implied threat. If you don't listen when I'm yelling, something bad's going to happen.
Right.
So talk to them, tell them the truth, listen to what they're saying, assume that it's the truth, because another huge problem is they're not going to the school that you went to. Even if you never left your hometown and they're literally going to the same high school you went to, it's not the same.
Yeah, it's completely different.
Right.
Even talking to them, it's completely different.
Yeah. And I mean, you were in high school, what, 10 years ago? And it's completely different for you already.
Yeah, definitely.
It is different. It's different in different places. Different teachers come in. different. I mean, I don't know what it would have been like if when I was the age that my children are, some people in my class were wearing masks and some people weren't. And somehow I knew that that was a big deal and adults felt very strongly about it. And like, what a weird thing that I never had to think about,
Yeah.
you know? So if you don't take their word as just blanket truth until and unless you have, because obviously sometimes they're wrong and sometimes they're right, just like adults. But unless you have specific information to say, no, I think that's incorrect or whatever, don't start from the default position of, that doesn't sound right to me. I think you're making that up. I think you're exaggerating. If it doesn't sound right to you, what that means is, wow, that's a lot bigger deal than I thought it was. Usually it means that's a lot worse than I thought it was. And so it's, as a parent, right? Like, I don't want to think I'm putting my kid into a situation that's way worse than I thought it was. So of course my knee-jerk reaction is going to be like, nah, I don't think it's that bad. I wouldn't have put you there if it was that bad. I
actually just visited my high school, fun fact, because I'm close to one of my teachers there, and just even looking around, it's just all very different, and all the different messaging in the hallways, like all the posters and all of that. I mean, it was just very different. No one was still there besides that one teacher. But there was a lot of good things, though, that I noticed that they were adding more stuff, which is good, but it is very different.
Yeah, different doesn't mean bad. It just means different. And we can look at trends and make general statements about things that are changes that we like or don't like, but not everybody, not every high school, not every teacher changes in the same ways, you know. That's why the blanket statement is listen to your kids, because they're the ones that are experiencing that. As a side benefit, if you listen to your kids, you know what happens? They talk to you.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah. If you listen to them and take what they're saying at face value and don't counteract or negate what they're saying unless you can point to specific information you have, then they'll come to you more and more and more. Shock, surprise. People like to feel heard. People don't like to feel unheard, especially when they're trying to be heard. So anyway, back to some of the more practical stuff at the beginning that we didn't wrap up on. If you do have to cut some like activities, right? Not just ways of doing it, which is always how I would recommend starting. Actually, let me give one specific practical thing on that. And then we'll go to the So specific practical thing, make sure that you know the actual criteria of the things that you're being asked to do. Especially when it comes to writing assignments. People tend to think that the criteria is, I have to write a great paper, I have to write a great essay, which is not the criteria, because it can't be, because how would we adjudicate that? You know, there is somewhere, either they gave you a piece of paper or they talked through it with you in class or whatever, theoretically, if they did it how they're supposed to do it, there should be specific information of, you need to share 3 examples, or you need to talk about what thoughts are currently in the field, as well as share one of your own, or you need to share 2 things that you agree with and one that you pull, whatever. And they'll say grammar and punctuation, say this and that. You do the bare minimum. That's the first thing that I would shift to, is don't overdo anything you're being asked to do. And I'm super guilty of this. I would bet that you are too, that like for me, if a paper I wrote, like the point of a paper, the way that it's supposed to be done is that it should change the professor's life. You know, like,
I put a lot on the line for that paper.
If they don't come to me afterwards saying like, wow, I never thought about it this way, you're brilliant, then I failed. You know? And that's not the case at all. The reason a lot of people get stuck in these patterns of, they'll call it procrastination, but they're doing writing assignments at the last minute, is because they're aiming for that, for like blowing the teacher's mind with every paper, which means if they start 2 weeks early, they're just going to work for 2 weeks. If they start 2 hours early, they'll work for 2 hours. And either way, they still get the A. I waited till the last minute, turned it in, got a 96, but I should start early. Why?
Yeah. And I've even like myself, like started earlier, and it was for me even more difficult to stop what I was doing and do something else. For me, it's just easier for me to sit there and do the whole thing. And I was told like, that's not right. That's not how you do it. But for me, that made me more like motivated or wanting to do it just by sitting there and doing it.
Yeah, it made it easier.
Yeah, easier.
Because you didn't have to transition in and out. You didn't have to think about it while you were thinking about other things. There's a common pattern for people with ADHD, but I hesitate even to say that because I don't want to reinforce this idea of you're supposed to do it this way, but if you have ADHD, it's okay to do it. If it works for you, it works for you. Whether you have ADHD or not, it doesn't matter. We don't care about the why. But it made it easier for you to do. It didn't make it more important for you to do. It didn't give you energy that you didn't previously have. It just was easier to do it that way.
I almost felt like at points it made me feel more anxious because I'd have to remember like, okay, now I have to go back and do this, and then I have to send it in. Whereas when I just did it in that one moment, all the check marks were done and I could just send it on out.
As an adult, imagine that you go to the office for 8 hours. And in that time, you have 8 different bosses, each of whom is talking to you about a different thing and asking you for a different thing. How would that go?
Awful. Yeah. I've been there. It doesn't work well.
I've been in positions where I have one boss who's asking me for different things, and it still gets frazzled. It's like, just let me finish the thing you asked me to do first.
Yeah.
Why in the world are we asking kids, okay, you got to track 8 different parallel tracks simultaneously, each of which has different processes, policies, protocols, different content, different deadlines, different schedules. Track it all, do it all, get it all in. And if you don't, that's because you did it badly. You failed. You're not doing it well. It's ridiculous. This should not be how we're doing it, but it is. So that's how you can engage with the kids, is just acknowledge that. Just say, yeah, this is an unfair thing that you're being asked to do, but it is what you're being asked to do. Doesn't mean it's right. Doesn't mean you should do it. It just means let's look at what happens if you do it or if you don't. So you asked, how do they decide what things to give up if they have to end up giving something up? You do it that way. You look at the consequences. You look at how much each thing is going to cost you. And you look at what will happen if you do it or don't do it. Or if I give this one my full effort and half-ass this one. Yeah. And you find the best return on investments. Right? If I... actually, this is very common. Some classes, especially math classes, will give so much homework, but only weight that homework, 10% of your final grade. So you could just say at the beginning, well, I just won't do any of the math homework, which means that my ceiling in math is now a 90% instead of a 100%. But trying to get that 1 letter grade difference is going to cost me 1,000 hours of work over the next 4 months. What can I buy and all the other things that way? Right. And it's not always that clear cut, but syllabi are very useful for this to make decisions of like, oh, this doesn't matter. I was saying about myth busting earlier. Homework does not help you master a skill or a subject. We have a lot of research about this. Homework does not improve learning outcomes. It just doesn't. I know that's what everybody says that it's for. I've even had many clients who, when they're asking their parents or somebody to help them, their parents will say, well, let me just do this part. They'll be like, no, I have to learn how to do it myself. No, you don't. No, you don't. Or if you think you do, ask why. Why do I need to do this? Even if theoretically doing this homework means I would master this skill, why do I need to master this skill? Why can't I just, in the future, when I also theoretically might need to do this again, come to my mom again for help?
I ask that question all the time.
Another human.
Right.
The academic environment is a very strange one. The whole point of it is to say, there are things that will be challenging and difficult for you that will be much easier if you learn some things in advance. But those things that we're trying to teach you, by definition, don't actually matter right now, because the whole point is that we're trying to give you information and experiences and skills that might be useful later.
Right.
So in order to get you to pay attention to it at all, we have to make it important right now and make it about grades and other consequences. That's why everybody will jump to, well, if you don't give grades, nobody will do anything, which on a high level, like systems level, I would say, if no one will do it without grades, then why are you asking them to do it?
Right. I do have one more thing I want to ask.
The
10 minutes. So a lot of questions I got about today's stream was about, you're going to like this, Brandon, the screens.
Oh boy.
I know I shouldn't have done this at the 10-minute mark, but for screens. So like limiting yourself to screens, not doing it after a certain time. What do you think about that? Because now, I mean, at least I know all schools are different, but in my family now they're having the iPads at school to do the homework with. So a lot of least I realize they feel like that's just enough, even though they're doing it for specifically schoolwork. They're like, okay, well, they've already been on it for 8 hours a day.
All right. There's a reason people are worried about screens. And aside from the reason of every generation is worried about things that they didn't grow up with, right? Every generation wants the next generation to grow up the same way that they did, except for in the specific ways that they wish were different about their own experience of growing up. So I don't want it to be exactly the same, but anything I liked about my childhood, I used to love running around playing outside with people and whatever. Why aren't you doing that? Because you're in here playing on your video games. But if that's an enjoyably, like a universally enjoyable experience running around playing outside, if it is, and it's not, it's just question some of your biases. What is your outside like, and what are other people's outsides like? But let's assume that it is. Even if it is, why would kids then choose to do something else instead? Either because they don't know how enjoyable that experience is. So yes, we want to try and expose them to these things so that they can see, or because they do know how enjoyable it is, but what they're doing instead is even more enjoyable.
Yeah.
Which is why then parents come back to, well, it's about health. It's about, this will be, even though it's not as enjoyable right now, it will be better for you later on to do this thing. And what I would say to parents about that, and as a parent myself, this is a terrifying thing and it's hard to accept. You don't know that it will be better.
Yeah.
You don't know that. I don't care what the research is. Tell me what exactly the world is going to be like 20 years from now. And one thing that we can say for sure, because we see it all the time, is if you monitor and control your child's access to technology, and then eventually they grow up and move out of your house, and now they have to monitor and control their own access to technology, what have they learned? They have no experience of what's good for me, what's too much for me, because I, as an adult, I can say, I like screens, I like them a lot, but there's a lot of things that I do or have patterns of ways that I've engaged with it where I'm like, oh no, I don't like this, I want to change this, and how do I do that, and whatever. You have to figure it out on your own.
Right. And I think I was even like, as a kid, I had a big neighborhood, so I was out with like 15, 20 kids running around. But even now, I mean, when I get out of work and I'm, on my phone scrolling or watching TV, it's so relaxing. And really, I think now as an adult, I feel like it is really beneficial to have that. Depending person to person, but
who would know better than you, right? If you say it's beneficial, then it is. And then people would say, well, but you only enjoy it because you've been doing it for so long, and now the other stuff isn't enjoyable because it feels like more work and whatever.
Right.
That's a very common one. Just so you know, something being difficult, something being hard work does not make it good. That's a very common myth out here, that hard work is in and of itself beneficial. It is not. It's not good to push yourself harder than you need to. It's worth working hard when you get something out of it that's worth it. But to say, oh yeah, no, you're not going to get anything out of it that's worth it, but just do it anyway, will not work over the long term.
Yeah.
So really, besides that, the whole like wanting children to grow up learning the things I liked or wished I had learned, there's a specific reason that we're so much against screens. And it's because the APA, the American Association of Pediatricians, made a recommendation: no screen time for kids age 0 to 2. I focus on this particular thing because everyone keeps talking about screens as though that's one thing.
Right.
Which it's not, obviously. There's a difference between a TV show and doing homework and a video game and texting your friend. They're different things. Who cares about the fact? That's like saying, oh, all social interaction is the same.
Right.
It's different. So don't treat it as one giant thing. But that recommendation was given in 1997. And because of how the research cycle works, what that means is it was based on research that had been done at the most recent at that point in 1992. We were not talking about interactive screens. They're talking about passive TV viewing. They repealed that. They no longer recommend that. They changed it in 2015, I think. And they've done some more now where they've gone more back in that direction. But that gave the idea that screen time is fun but bad for you.
Right.
Like sugar or like a poison. It's like, it's okay. You can tolerate it in small amounts, but if you take too much of it, it will hurt you, right? That's not true. Again, we have all kinds of research, and you have anecdotal experience this yourself. The more you use technology, there are definitely times that you don't like it, but you use technology way more in your work today than you did 10 years ago, right? Any of you who've been working for 10 years, do you feel overall worse off in a way that you can explicitly tie to the screens? No, it makes things easier.
Yeah.
And again, people will say, well, they got to learn the value of hard work. No, they don't. Why would we invent things that make things easier? We want to free up those resources so we can do other things, right? So just generally, here's what I would tell people about screens. It is fine to be concerned. It is fine to want to limit how much your kids are doing, only because of opportunity cost in terms of limiting how much. In terms of limiting what they're accessing, that's no different than books or magazines or anything else. You know, like you want to know what the content is that they're accessing and make your decisions as a parent or as a family on what things are okay or whatnot. But if we're talking just purely about time limit or whatever, then don't make it about restricting what they're doing. Make it about including all the things that are important. Opportunity cost means if I'm spending an hour on the screen, I can't spend that hour doing something else, right? So what is the other thing you would want them doing with that time? This goes back to that first thing too, by the way. It's, you got to ask, why do I think this is bad? Right. Well, because there's something they're missing out. If you just remove an option from somebody, that if someone's doing something, it's because they think it's their best option of things to do for whatever, you know, balancing all those things. If you try and take that away from them, they now have to pick or do something that they have already considered, but they thought was worse than the thing. And again, they might be wrong. But if you want somebody to not resent you for that, then you got to give them something else better. Right. Don't just ban them from the thing that they like. Show them something else that you think is better. And yes, you can make that, you know, you don't have time to sit down and like monitor everything or whatever. So you can make systems, but make your systems about inclusive. Well, I think they need to get out more. Cool. Then make a rule that they got to get out for an hour a day, not a rule that they can't use the technology.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good idea.
I think they need to go to bed early. Cool. Make a rule to go to bed early, not to limit the technology. Because when you're an adult and you're running your own life, to the extent that any adult does, then that's how it works. I got to get stuff done. And then with whatever I have left over, what I don't have to get done, I do whatever I want. Right. That's what we want to train them to do too. Because I'll tell you, and you've seen this, I'm sure, the number of clients that I'm like, okay, well, let's say you had some free time, some free energy. What would you want to do?
I don't know.
People don't know.
Yeah.
Because we don't teach them. We tell them to do what we tell them to ignore their own desires, that at worst, their own desires are actually bad. But at best, I don't really care what your desires are, just do this thing. Right. And then you turn 17 and we're like, now it really matters what you want to do with the rest of your life. You've never learned how to figure out what you want, but now you got to decide where you're going to go to school, which we're telling you is very important, and it isn't. But we're telling you is very important. And what you're going to study, which we're telling you is very important, which it isn't, but we're telling you it is. And every single one of them has a crisis. They're like, how the hell would I know? Yeah. Other than to just go to the most prestigious school I can get into, or the ones that my parents like, or the ones that I like the football team or whatever. Yeah. You know? So you got to let people explore and engage and experiment with things, not to the detriment of other important things and not in a way that's risky or dangerous. But you say, here are the things that are like, instead of saying no screens at dinner, we say at dinner, we talk to each other. It's not about what we're excluding. It's about what we're including. Yeah. So approach it from that direction. Plus, then you don't have to fight over all kinds of stuff. Because if I limit your screen time, what if you sneak away and it becomes an arms race? If I say, no, you must do this, this, and this, I can tell whether you did those things. Yeah. I can see, did you clean your room? Yes, we're good. Otherwise, I have to be vigilant constantly, and they're going to try and sneak. And it just doesn't work. On shorthand, you try and limit your kids' screen time, you'll fight about it more and more and more and more, and it'll ruin your relationship. Yeah. That's a very brief. Yeah.
I know seconds. The 10 minutes was a bad choice to ask that question for.
No, that's all right. And you got to get going.
Yes.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, everybody.
I will stay on for just another minute while you step away, if that's okay, because I want to wrap up one other thing that we brought up about the studying.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
That's your chair.
Yeah.
You need to take your chair. So
I'll get my water cup later.
Do you have another one?
Yeah,
okay.
I do. I'll be good.
I'm going to block so people don't watch you leave. The other thing that came up that I was tracking that I didn't resolve and wanted to make sure to get back to was in the studying. Margaret had asked some specific questions about studying, how to know, and I started talking about the process. And yes, the first part of that process is investigate, research, recon, whatever makes it sound most fun, which can include looking at the syllabus. The easiest way, if that teacher or professor does this, and they all should, but not all do, if they give you a practice exam, do the practice exam over and over and over. That's your metric for whether you're prepared for the exam. Theoretically, whatever they give you should match pretty closely the test that they're going to give you later. If it doesn't, that's an issue, and that needs to be handled in a different kind of a way, because they're setting you up for failure if they're saying this will help you prepare for the test and then give you a separate thing. So start with practice exams if you have them. If not, talk to the teacher, professor, look at the syllabus to get information that way. Talk to other people who have taken the class before with that teacher or that professor, just to get a sense, not specifically of like what questions will be on the test, but what are the kinds of questions that are going to be on the test? Are we talking about multiple choice, short essay answers, true, false, right? Again, the instructor should give you that information. So you find out that, what does the test look like? What is the format of the test? Because that will guide a lot of the things that you do. And then what information is the test attempting to elicit from you? Meaning, what are they grading you on? If it's multiple choice, it's very clear one of the answers is correct and the others are incorrect. Even then, it gets tricky because sometimes those tests aren't written well. And you can debate which one's correct, but theoretically. If it's a short answer or an essay, then it's going to be a lot more important for you to get a sense of what are you. For example, I don't know if this is still true, but when I was in high school, I took AP psychology, and we were told in that class, they will not grade you on the format of your writing. They care only about the content. And so I think when I took the AP test, I don't even know that I did multiple paragraphs. It might have just been one super long, big block of and I got a 4 or 5 or whatever it was, pass, because that was true. They don't care in that, at least at that time, they didn't care about the structure. They just cared about the content. Whereas on the English one, they care a lot about the structure, right? So look at the format and what is it that they're looking for, the criteria, the content that they're looking for, and then design your study approach for that thing, specifically for that thing. This isn't about if you study, you'll learn this information. And everybody who's ever studied for a test before, unless they've only studied for a test within the last 2 weeks, will tell you that it does not help you retain the information long term. None of that stuff does. That you can study something 4 hours a day for 6 weeks, and 20 years later, unless it's information that you've been using, you're not going to remember it. So this isn't about long term. It's about your performance on the exam or the assessment. Aim for that. Don't worry about what might help you more with it afterwards. Of course, there might be specific exceptions to that, but make sure you know that it's an exception. Otherwise, it's about the test. It's about your performance on the exam, the assessment, whatever. So design a strategy for that one, and then it's done. And the next time you have a test, you start over again with getting research and designing a new thing, a new way to study for that specific one. Obviously, if it's the same class, same teacher, professor, whatever, you don't need to do as much the second time around. If they're saying it's going to be like the last one, just covering unit 4 instead of unit 3, you can reliably carry over a lot of the stuff that worked for you before. But if you're with a new teacher or in a different subject or in a different class, different semester, whatever, then you're going to want to start over from scratch. Saying that you need to study for a test is kind of like saying you need to work to earn money. Like, it's not that it's untrue necessarily. It's just that it doesn't, what do you mean work? Like, there's lots of different ways to work for different amounts of money. Studying is not a specific behavior. It's a word we use to describe a set of activities that we think will help you to retain knowledge for the purpose of expressing that knowledge on a test. It is not, I've learned how to study, 2 years ago, I came up with my study process. I know what works for me. That worked for you in that specific context. You come up with a new one. I guess another way to think about it would be like if you're an athlete, you play football, that the mechanics of playing football are going to be similar from game to game to game, but if you're doing it at a higher level, probably at even a high school level, I don't really know, I'm just guessing here, then you're probably going to do some scouting of your opponent in a given week because the game plan will change. So there are some things you can do that are going to help you. You know, conditioning is going to help you no matter what, and running drills and blah, blah, blah. But a game is like an assessment, right? That if the point is to win that game, who cares if our fundamentals are good or whatever? If the things we've been drilling go well, it doesn't matter. It just matters if we win. A win is a win, right? That's how you should approach tests. And therefore, if you were doing a game, you'd want to scout your opponent and say, well, these guys are weak against the run, so we're going to focus on the run this week. Even if what our team does best is passing, if these people are good at defending against the pass but not against the run, then we're going to shift. Tests you approach the same way. It doesn't matter that I'm really good at memorization if I'm approaching a test that memorizing isn't going to help me with. Even though I'm good at it, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to find what will help me in this test. And so then we go from there. And looking over notes, rereading the chapter book, the textbook, just blanket, never really a good strategy. I'm sure there's exceptions to that, but assume that it's not, that neither of those things will work, or at least that they're inefficient, even if they do help, that other better things could do more for you. And note cards are going to be great for memorization. Taking the practice test is going to be great for learning the format of the test, not so much the content, because typically the questions that you're asked on the practice test are not going to be the same as the questions that are asked on the test. So it's to practice the format. Practice under test conditions, if you know what those test conditions are going to be like. And always come back to, like for math, for example, if you're getting ready for a math test and you know it's going to cover Pythagorean theorem, then do some Pythagorean problems. Yeah, Pythagorean theorem problems, do some practice problems. And if in those problems you hit you get stuck, you can't resolve it, right? Then pause, go learn at that point, including looking at the textbook or your notes. But really these days, the best way to do it is find videos online. Learn that specific thing, then go back and complete the problem and do the next problem. And if you get stuck, pause, go learn, come back and complete the problem, so that the information you're getting is being utilized and you know specifically why it matters, as opposed to study Pythagorean theorem first, then do a bunch of practice problems. And once you can do a bunch of practice problems and you don't have to pause anymore, you're done. Do you know for sure that you won't encounter something on the test that will get you stuck again? No. But if I just did 10 practice problems without having to stop, I could make my way through those 10. What's the chances that if I do another 10, I'll encounter some specific thing that the test might? The point isn't to be ready for everything. The point is to match what you're spending against how valuable it is. So I want to be ready for, if I can do 10 in a row without a problem, I think I'll probably be okay on that subject. Sometimes I can do 2 on a problem, on a particular subject, and I think I'll be okay. You might not be, but you can't be ready for everything. Don't aim for a 100. Aim for an A if that's what you're aiming for. If you're going to set a metric like that, which is great, I'm not discouraging that, but make it a window, not perfect. If you're aiming for perfect, you're very unlikely to get that at least every time. And even if you do get it, you're probably way over prepared. If you get 100%, you probably know a lot more than you need to know in order to get that 100%. It's unlikely if you got a 100% on a test that you knew all the things you needed to know to get that 100, but nothing else extra, right? So just ask these questions. Ask why. Not every time, but if something sounds like a good idea, go ahead and do it. If it doesn't work for any reason, including I don't get myself to start it or whatever you're going to say, then ask, why am I doing this thing again? Why does it matter? That's not to suggest that it doesn't matter. It's just, if you know why it matters, then it's easier to come up with new strategies. If I say, okay, you're going to go down this street, take the 3rd left, take the 2nd right, and then you're going to go through the roundabout straight, and then you're going to take the 4th left, and it's the 3rd house on the left. Well, then you better follow my instructions exactly, because if you don't, if you miss one of those turns or miscount or whatever, you're stuck unless you go all the way back to the beginning and try it again. But if I say, here's the address, even if I follow that up by saying, take the third left, the second right, go through the roundabout straight, take the third left, and then it's the third house on the left. I don't think those are the same each time, but close. Even if I say the address first and then I follow it up with the instructions, you might follow the instructions, and that's great. But if you make a mistake, you know what you're aiming for and you can find a way to correct. And some people, you're not going to listen to the instructions because once I gave you the address, you're just going to plug it in. Why would you need, even if I am going to talk about it, why would you listen, right? Figure out what you're going for. Doesn't mean that you should never follow the step-by-step instructions people say will get you where you're trying to get. But if you know where you're going for, then if those things don't work, then you can make an adjustment. I got a bunch more to say always about everything, but it gives me sometimes how incredibly concerned they are about their kids spending too much time on the screen, and also how unwilling they are to spend time with their kids to get them doing other things. Yeah. I'll say this. Different people are different, and different factors matter, right? So I'm not saying that parents and their own children should do the same things and have the same rules and expectations, because people are different and we should adjust for that. But when it comes to screens, if you are limiting their screen usage and you use screens more than you allow them to, it's worth investigating why you think it's not okay for them, but is okay for you. It's worth investigating what message you're sending and having conversations there. Certainly, if a kid wants to play on a screen or whatever, and you're on your phone and you say no to them while you stay on your phone, what is that communicating? I'm not saying it's a terrible thing. There are reasons to be, I'm working, they just want to put whatever, that's fine. But from their perspective, you're doing a thing that you're telling them that they can't do without giving any reasoning. That's fine. Just be aware of what you're doing. If you want them to do other things, help them do other things or incentivize them to do other things. Don't disincentivize the thing that they're doing. Yeah, okay. It's past time. I'm going to go. Good to be with you guys. Thank you for being here. We'll be back next week, Wednesday, 1 to 2. Oh, I am sorry about last week. Wires got crossed, and yeah, we didn't stream last week. We were supposed to. I apologize for that. From now on, we'll be back to the regular Wednesday, 1 to 2 p.m. Central Time. Thank you.